Hey everybody. So, you and I are about to have a minor disagreement on terminology, I think. I think of myself as a Star Wars fan. But, I've seen the movies. I like the movies. I've played a couple of Star Wars related video games, and that's about the limit of my fandom. I like the experiences I've had with Star Wars, but I've never actually, dived deep in. I never read any of the books. I don't know any of the deep lore or the extended universe, the expanded universe. I think it's called Legends now. Whatever. I just watched the movies for the most part. So, I'm not as hardcore a fan as most Star Wars fans, I think, are. That said, I like movies in general, and I like Star Wars movies, and then this one came out, and I had some issues. This is The Last Jedi. Now, I think, and I could be wrong, that a lot of the issues I have with The Last Jedi aren't the issues a lot of other people had, because, like I mentioned earlier, I'm kind of a mild fan of Star Wars. But I am a movie guy. So I know what a lot of issues other people had are. I just don't think that that's going to be the issues I had. But let's find out together. We open with the rebels mounting an evacuation, attempting to leave the system before the First Order arrives to wipe them out. Several Star Destroyers leap into orbit around the planet, as does some souped-up Star Destroyer called the Dreadnought. I should also point out here that I'm going to assume you've seen the previous movie, The Force Awakens. I'm also going to kind of assume you've seen this one. So my walkthrough of this movie, it might not be as in-depth as it used to be for other movies, because I'm not going to explain to you who Luke Skywalker is. Either you know or you don't. Poe Dameron decides to save the rebels some time by taunting the bad guys over the radio as he floats around in his lone X-Wing in front of a massive enemy fleet. Then, Poe single-handedly begins destroying all the guns on the Dreadnought. Now, I don't know much about Star Destroyers, other than they sound scary. Like, can they destroy a star? That's pretty scary. They're big, they're menacing, but apparently they are utterly incapable of hitting a really small ship once it gets up close to me, which seems a little silly, but okay. The bad guys decide to start scrambling fighters to take out Poe, and even an entire fleet of enemy ships cannot take down one single X-Wing. But General Leia orders him back anyway. He ignores those orders because now that he's taken out all the cannons on this ship, the Resistance bombers have a chance to just wipe out the Dreadnought. They come in, they drop some bombs. By Dreadnought. Of course, sending a whole group of very big, very slow-moving ships against something that's referred to as a fleet killer turns out to be a pretty stupid idea. And only one bomber actually makes it into range intact, which is actually still pretty impressive considering there's like 100 ships to one out there. The fact that one managed is good job. There's some drama that happens, and then, by sacrificing her own life, the last remaining crew member on the last remaining bomber is able to release the bombs, which all drop straight down onto the Dreadnought, because as we know, things fall down in space, since space has, gravity. Although, I know, you can't pick on Star Wars for its accurate depiction of physics. I'd also like to point out that while this is happening, none of the Star Destroyers are doing anything about the fleet of Resistance ships that are getting away. This is a fleet of Star Destroyers doing jack all against the enemy getting away, and you can't tell me they were too busy engaged in this battle, because one of the bombers still managed to get through a fleet of Star Destroyers. Now, as Finn wakes up to join the story, we begin to encounter one of my bigger problems with this movie: the tonal shifts. This movie frequently shifts between diarist drama and slapstick comedy. And look, I'm not saying you can't have comedy and drama. In fact, most movies, whether they're dramas or even slasher films, any genre you can think of has comedic moments in it. That's fine. Of course you can have comedic moments in drama. But there's a limit to how silly you can get and still have the drama matter to the audience. You just can't do, we're running for our lives, almost out of fuel, and if we fall, the galaxy is doomed, and then cut to... No, seriously. People are dying. Lives are at stake. Nobody may get out of this alive. It doesn't work like that. If you can't take your movie seriously, then you can't expect the audience to take the movie seriously. You have to decide what you want most of all. Do you want us laughing, or do you want us invested in the story of these characters? One of these things has to be more important than the other. Either you're a comedy or you're a drama. You can't be both simultaneously. Meanwhile, Rey and Luke show what a lot of people disliked about this movie. Its need to continually defy expectations. But we're actually going to talk about that closer to the end. Luke, refusing to train Rey and refusing to get back into the fight, bothered a lot of fans. I heard a lot of cries of, Luke wouldn't do that. But you know what? It's been like 30 years. He's been through some stuff. You can't tell how a person will react to things over the course of their life. The strong can break, the weak can persevere, but most importantly, he's a fictional character who can grow in whatever direction his writer says he grows in. Meanwhile, back at our Resistance, the First Order has managed to track them through light speed using new technology. So in order to keep out of range of their weapons until they figure out a way to beat the tracking technology, the rebels begin a slow-speed car chase. Apparently, the Resistance ships are just fast enough to stay out of range for as long as their fuel lasts. Oh yeah, but first this happens. This is another thing people complained about, but I'm fine with Leia using the Force. I mean, she comes from a Force-rich family, even though she wasn't trained in it. I'm going to assume when your death is moments away, you can tap some unmined resources, you know? And I'm okay with the Force working this way. Like, it'd be silly if she could pull an entire starship towards her, but pulling herself towards the starship kind of makes sense, right? I can bring a small object to me, or I can bring me to a large object. I accept that. My biggest complaint about this whole thing is just that it looks silly.
I'm Mary Poppins, y'all!
After some soul searching, Luke decides that he'll train Rey a little bit. With Leia knocked out, the Resistance puts Vice Admiral Holden here in charge. Finn is planning to leave in an escape pod to find Rey when he meets his new sidekick Rose. Rose isn't terribly bright. See, she's guarding the escape pod to make sure that nobody deserts and escapes in one of the escape pods. And it takes her a stone-cold 5 minutes to realize that the guy she catches loading his stuff into the escape pod might be planning to use the escape pod to escape. Finn, Poe, and Rose come up with a secret plan to save the day. They can sneak onto the lead destroyer, disable the tracker, and then everybody gets away happy. The only downside is they would need a code breaker to help them sneak onto the enemy ship undetected. Luckily, Maz, from the last movie, she knows exactly the guy they need. A hacker, a pilot, a fighter, and basically all-around god. He's a poet with a blaster. So Finn and Rose go on a mission to recruit the code breaker. Rey and Kylo find that their minds are somehow linked through the Force, and they're seeing each other and having conversations with each other. Although, this is shown through the most ridiculously poor special effects possible. And by special effects, I mean they just shoot the two characters talking off camera to each other. It looks kind of like this, which is really a clumsy way to do it. It doesn't look good. Especially for a series with such good special effects. It's like the director wasn't even trying. Finn and Rose arrive on the gambling planet where the codebreaker is. They park illegally on the beach and go to meet him. This is very important. I want you to remember that they parked illegally. This will come up again. And here's our codebreaker in the white suit. Now, I have two complaints about this entire casino scene, and they aren't big, but they're things that bothered me. First of all, we see dozens of aliens that we've never seen before in Star Wars, which I'm cool with. Like, great, it's a big galaxy, let's have a lot of different critters out there, that's fine. But we don't see a single alien species we're familiar with at all. There are no Twi'leks in the casino, in fact, in the entire movie. There's one Mon Calamari, and he was killed. There's none of those flathead guys with the voices. There are no recognizable Star Wars species in this movie, except for Admiral Akbar. And that just feels like... It makes it feel like the creator of this film is so desperate to put its own mark on the Star Wars universe that he's like, don't pay attention to anything that's come before. I don't want to bring in old stuff. All new stuff from here on out. And that kind of turns me off. Like, you're part of a universe, right? You're part of an ongoing story. The second one that bothers me is Codebreaker guy. Spoiler, he has one line of dialogue, and we never see him again. So, considering how awesome Maz told us he was, she described him as a poet with a blaster, the greatest code cracker, a pilot, a man who could do anything. How great would it have been if this part, that has one line, was Lando Calrissian? Would that not have been a great cameo? He's not a part of the ongoing story, right? And Lando hasn't showed up in this new trilogy. It would have been a really big payoff to Star Wars fans to have her sing this guy's praises like she did, and then for it to be Billy D. Williams. I'm just saying it is an enormous missed opportunity. I'm so sad that it didn't happen. Before our heroes can go and talk to not Lando, they get stunned and arrested for illegal parking. Not charged a fine, not having their vehicle towed, attacked and arrested for parking illegally. This Rey and Luke storyline is very slow to pan out. Basically, it comes down to this. Kylo Ren was very strong in the Force, but his power in the dark side was growing, and afraid of what he became, Luke considered, for a moment, killing his student before he went evil. Now, Luke didn't go through with it, but Kylo realized what he was thinking when he was thinking it, and so Kylo knocked him out, killed all the students, and burned down the school. This is why Luke is afraid to train somebody like Rey, who is so powerful in the Force, because he's afraid he will repeat the same mistakes. There. I just described in 2 minutes what took like 45 minutes of movie. You're welcome. One by one, the smaller ships in the Resistance fleet are running out of fuel, getting evacuated, falling behind, and being blown up. I'm going to bring this up later too. By an amazing coincidence, Finn and Rose find themselves locked in a cell with an expert code breaker. Not the one they were told to find, but one who turns out is just as good, even though Maz says she only knew of one person who was good enough to actually sneak them onto the ship undetected. Turns out there was a second one, and they just happened to be locked up in a cell with him. What an amazingly poorly written stroke of luck! So with the help of their new friend, they escape from prison. Then follows a long and epic chase sequence as our heroes attempt to get back to their ship and get off-world. And during this entire chase, all I can think was, all of this over a parking ticket. They take parking very seriously on this world. And of course, no discussion of this movie would be complete without a look at the world's most rectangular man.
Do you have something, a cowl or something you can put on?
When Luke again refuses to join the fight with the Resistance, Rey goes off to recruit Kylo, because after their back and forth chat, she believes he can be turned to the forces of good. Alright, at a certain point, you need to decide if you're making a Star Wars movie or a parody of Star Wars movies. Right before Rose and Finn can disable the tracker, it turns out the Codebreaker has betrayed them, and their mission has failed. This means that their entire storyline, which comprises like a third of the movie, is completely and utterly pointless. It takes up a lot of time, and it goes absolutely nowhere and accomplishes absolutely nothing. You could remove it from the entire movie, and nobody would notice. Speaking of plots that go nowhere, there's a whole subplot about Poe committing mutiny in order to buy Finn and Rose more time for their failed plan. And the result of this mutiny? Nothing. Holden is still able to execute her original plan. Nobody suffers any consequences for what they did. Why does this movie persist in wasting my time like this? Rey makes it onto Snoke's ship and is immediately brought before Snoke, because it turns out Kylo has no intention of turning to the light side. All of the Resistance, except for Vice Admiral Holden, flee for a nearby planet that used to house a rebel base in escape vessels, which then fall under attack from the enemy fleet. Finding himself unable to kill Rey, Kylo uses the Force to kill Snoke, removing our big bad for the series. I'll be honest, I was not expecting that. I do have a quick question about these guys fighting to avenge Snoke. See, we see that the weapons that they're using can hold their own against a lightsaber. Like, they come in, boom, lightsaber does not chop it in half. Fine. We also see a couple of them interacting with the lightsabery parts of their weapon against their armor, holding the sword against their arm or grabbing parts of the lightsaber whip. And it doesn't cut through their armor. But then Kylo and Ren's lightsabers do cut through the armor like butter. Something seems off about that. Kylo becomes so upset when Rey refuses to join him as the new head of the First Order that he tells her the truth about her parents. Now, this is a mystery the first movie alluded to multiple times. Many, many fan theories have come up. Who are Rey's parents? How does she tie into this whole thing? And it turns out they're nobody special. Nobody of consequence whatsoever. And here's where we're going to talk about that lightsaber throwing away moment from the beginning of the movie. I said we were coming back to that. All of the dramatic elements from The Force Awakens are thrown away in this movie. This moment, the mystery of Rey's parents, completely... Oh wow, don't worry about that. Turns out they're nothing. The background of Supreme Leader Snoke. Who was he? Who is this mysterious bad... It doesn't matter, we killed him. The death of Captain Phasma, who looks cool, stands out from the crowd, and yet, in both of these movies, is just thrown away. But you know what? While none of these decisions are decisions that I would make as a writer, if I were responsible for writing this movie, I don't really have that big an issue with them. This is the kind of thing you have to expect when you allow a different writer to come in and tell each part of your story. They're going to come in with their own idea of what's important and where the story should go. So you get what you get. As long as the movie makes sense, I'm going to try not to pick it apart for telling the story differently than I would. I really think the main problem is bringing in different people with different artistic visions and telling them to tell a part of a cohesive story. Because you cannot watch this movie and not feel as if the writer-director was just throwing out chunks of The Force Awakens. Like, nope, don't need that. Don't need that part. Let's get rid of that. It does feel slightly disrespectful of the work that came before. I know it's not meant to be, but it's how I read it. But again, in and of itself as a movie, fine, tell your story. And leave the next guy to pick up the mess. Holden saves the day by having her vessel go into light speed while facing the enemy fleet, which causes her vessel to break apart. Basically, she shotgun blasts the enemy fleet. Okay, first of all, I'm no longer impressed by Star Destroyers. They can't shoot down a single ship. They can't catch a fleet going away from them. They're taking forever to shoot down defenseless ships that take one shot to kill, and then one ship going into hyperdrive disables all of them. So why didn't we do that earlier? Remember earlier where one by one the smaller ships were running out of fuel and getting destroyed? Why not at one of those points, after you've evacuated everybody off the ship except for one brave soul, turn one of them around, have it go into light speed and destroy the enemy fleet, saving thousands of lives. And taking out the leader of the First Order. If it's this simple, this effective, and they see it coming. When she turns the ship around and powers up the hyperdrive, they all look like, oh god, we know what's going to happen. So clearly this is not like, what's that? What will that do? So why does nobody do it? Why does nobody think about it? This is crazy to me. One ship can take out a fleet. Fine. Then why don't they do that? And now all of the remaining good guys group up at the abandoned rebel base on the planet, and the remaining bad guys group up to mount a final assault, and we're almost at the end of this thing. Just when the Resistance realize they are outgunned and out of hope, Luke shows up, and he gives Leia a souvenir that he found on the Millennium Falcon in remembrance of Han. It's a pair of dice. He gives it to his sister, and then goes out to face an entire army by himself. Kylo is freaked when he sees Luke, and he orders every gun to shoot at that man, because he's either pissed or terrified or both. And when the smoke clears, Luke is still standing there, and honestly, for this movie, it's kind of a surprise. The way this movie's been going, it would have been in keeping had Luke just been wiped off the face of the planet. But instead, Kylo decides to go down and face him one-on-one. Poe realizes that if Luke could sneak into the base, then there must be a secret back exit, so all of the good guys begin retreating again, going to the back of the base. Having bought the good guys the time they needed, Luke reveals himself to be an illusion, projected by the Force. Although the effort of maintaining an illusion for so long over such a long distance does actually kill Luke. All of this, actually a pretty neat plot twist, except for two things. Remember earlier, the only reason the Resistance realized, hey, there's got to be a back way out of here was because Luke was able to sneak in? Yeah, Luke wasn't able to sneak in. He was an illusion. So the fact that you found a back exit, that's just completely random happenstance. But more importantly, that trinket that Luke gave Leia, yeah, that was part of the illusion too, because he wasn't really there. So that really touching moment where he bonded with his sister over their dead friend was by giving her air. He gave her air and then left. And somehow, the illusion of those dice, the air he left behind, actually lasts longer than the illusion of him, even though he's no longer touching it. So while he was out there fighting for his... Well, he wasn't fighting. He was dodging for his life to buy the Resistance time. Part of him was thinking, oh, and don't forget about those dice. Don't forget about those dice. You gotta keep the dice there until the last minute. And even when he faded out, he must have still been projecting the dice. For some reason, somehow... No, because it looks good in a movie. Forget logic, it looks good. And so the remaining good guys escape on the Millennium Falcon, ready to fight another day. Honestly, the movie's okay, I guess. I think the director tried way too hard to make it funny where it didn't need to be. I think he was poking a lot of fun at the tropes that made Star Wars what it is. Which is fine. It's very clear he wanted to reinvent Star Wars, which again is not a bad thing. If something's been around for a really long time, it's okay for somebody to come along and say, hey, what if we twisted this? What if we tried this? What if we reinvented it a little bit, tried something new? All of that's fine. But the wrong place to do it is in the middle of a story. This is a trilogy, right? This is the second movie of a trilogy. And all the second movie does is deconstruct what the first movie established. That's not right. You're telling a story. You're part of a chain. You are not the custodian for Star Wars. You are a temporary caretaker until you pass it on to the next one. You're in a chain of directors. I'll tell my part. I'll tell my part. Then I'll finish it off. The guy in the middle can't go, oh, wait, I don't like everything you just did. Because then what's the third guy supposed to do? What they should have done, and what I understand they are doing, if this guy has a vision to reinvent Star Wars, give him his own trilogy. Here, go make 3 movies that have nothing to do with the Skywalkers. Just go, and I'll bet you it'll be great. I bet you it'll be a lot of fun when he makes his own trilogy of movies. But that wasn't his job here. His job here was to continue the story that was started, and he doesn't. He tears it apart and leaves the next guy with just scraps to work with. I'm not surprised that a lot of people were upset by this movie. I'm not surprised that a lot of people really liked this movie. The people that were upset felt like the stuff that they were invested in was being torn apart and spit on. And although I don't think that was necessarily the intent, that is what was done. The people that really liked it was because it was fresh, interesting, and different, which it was. It didn't fall into the same tropes. It turned those tropes around, which is fine. But this wasn't a standalone movie. But at least we can all agree on one thing. That alien boob juice scene was just weird, right?